where serial killers, abductions, and mysterious circumstances are abundant. Join me, Tiffany, and my co-host Sam, two moms, as we cover local true crime cases that will leave you wanting more. Tune in every weekend for our new episodes where we rotate between North Carolina and South Carolina true crime cases. Find us on all major podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram at Cola City Crime, and you can find our Facebook page by searching our name, Cola City Crime.
I'm a friend of Bruce's. My name's Tim Hoffner. I'm on death row in Ohio, but I recently changed my name legally to Taci Vixen, and I identify as trans. But a subject that we talked about recently in some emails was the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court regarding Roe v. Wade, which I think is a horrible, horrible decision. And affects women in a very negative way. There's very staunch supporters of who claim to be pro-life, though they support the death penalty, and they're generally Republicans. But there's staunch supporters of being anti-abortion, regardless of the fact if a woman was raped or got pregnant by incest. I was recently watching CNN, and I think it was CNN. Well, it was a Sunday morning political show, but a person was interviewing the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, and they asked her a question about a specific girl who was raped in Indiana who became pregnant, if she felt that abortion would be appropriate. And she kind of walked around the question. She didn't give an answer. But the really horrifying part about that is the fact that the girl is 10 years old. And they don't feel that getting an abortion is appropriate for a 10-year-old girl who's clearly the victim of a sexual assault in some way. Mm-hmm. It's just appalling. But the court being a conservative majority, and then you had Clarence Thomas, who I think is a clown, make references to other cases that maybe they ought to revisit, like, regarding same-sex marriage, LGBTQ rights, and others. What is also interesting is, I remember after that decision was leaked, before it was officially made, there was a Republican in Indiana also. I can't recall his name, but he's an elected official who said, yeah, cool, that's great. Now let's revisit Loving v. Virginia. And for those of you out there who don't know what the Loving v. Virginia case is, there was a movie based on that decision called Loving, and it was regarding interracial marriage. So I mean, if they're talking about doing that's really fucked up. In many states who had laws on the books that were banned interracial marriage, the only exception was if the other person who was not white was a Native American. Mm-hmm. Then that was okay. But anybody outside of being white, it was prohibited. And it wasn't just a prohibition against African Americans. If they were Chinese, Samoan, Japanese, whatever, it didn't matter. Mexican, it was illegal. So that's really insane. Another case I heard mentioned was revisiting Lawrence v. Texas. Lawrence versus Texas, I believe it was decided in 2005. I read it, but it was around that time frame. Lawrence versus Texas dealt with sodomy laws. A lot of people didn't realize at that time and I'm not sure of the specific number of states that had laws on the books, so I'm just going to throw a number out there and speculate. But I'm thinking it was probably between a dozen and a dozen and a half states that had sodomy laws on the books. I'm thinking I heard that before, but I can't quite recall, but it would be information people could probably find out easily online. But the gist of Lawrence versus Texas is this. A guy got locked up in Texas because he was having sex with another guy. So he appealed his conviction and whatever, and it ended up going to the U.S. Supreme Court. U.S. Supreme Court agreed with Lawrence and, said, look, no, there's nothing wrong with two consenting adults having, any type of consensual sexual act together, regardless if they're the same gender or not. But what people did not understand, and I've had to explain to other guys here that I'm locked up with, is that in some states where sodomy laws were on the books, it was illegal for a man to have sex with his wife in a position other than missionary, which means they couldn't have sex doggy style. They couldn't have anal sex or whatever, and they're married. I remember many years ago, I heard something, I read about it, or I saw something on TV about it, where somebody was walking through a person's yard, and this was in a southern state, I don't recall which state, and this person was walking through the yard, just happened to stop and peep in one of the windows in the house, which is just creepy as fuck, but the window he happened to look in was this married couple's bedroom, and the man was having sex with his wife doggy style. Well, the guy called the cops and the couple were arrested. I don't know what the outcome was, but I mean, that's seriously fucked up. You're married, you're consenting adults, and that's how laws were on the books at that time. So this type of decision that the U.S. Supreme Court just made, where one of the justices on there is making reference to revisit these cases, saying they should revisit these. Well, yeah, some could argue there's no constitutional right to those things. People have to understand there's a whole lot of freedoms that we have that there is no constitutional right to. And that's scary when you have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court like that who are not living in the reality we are currently living in this time. You've got over 2/3 of the public who support abortion rights with limitations, and I agree with that. There should be some type of limitations, but not uber limitations set forth by people who have their own religious or political agenda based on that of a clown who used to be president, who is a disgrace.
Yeah, I agree on that.
Yeah. Yep. And I've told people this before Trump was in office and during his time in office. Shit is going to come out that is going to lead to him being indicted. The interesting thing that I've told people is this. Almost every single investigation he is under right now, it is because of his own mouth. If people think that what he's done is not a crime, that's because they don't understand the law. That's the problem. I've even told my own mother this, and she works up the ground he walks on, and I told her, and I was being dead serious, but it was also a bit of a joking jab, and I told her, I said, so many people complain about the economy and stuff like that, and I said, one industry that's probably done really well is the cosmetics industry. I said, because of all the foundation people have to buy to cover up the bruises on their face because they had to have their faces pried off of Trump's ass because they believe everything he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
He is a habitual pathological liar, and he needs to be concerned about stuff that's going to happen, especially in Georgia, because Fani Willis has no problem indicting our former president.
That's interesting.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, it's there's a lot of problems, and then you've got people that want to attack LGBT, people and stuff like that. Myself, dealing with the Ohio prison system the way that I have, I feel like I'm dealing with clowns in Trump's administration because they are so focused on wanting to deny people treatment that they should be getting based on their uneducated opinions. I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria by one of the top experts in the world. His name is Dr. George Brown. He's a professor at the University of Tennessee. I think he's professor emeritus. I can't even quite remember what that means, but anyway, he's been there for over 25 years. But he has a lifetime achievement award from I believe it's WPATH for research into the subject of gender dysphoria. I mean, he's been doing that stuff for going on 40 years. He knows a little bit about the subject, and I mean, he's one of the top 3 experts in the United States. And I was fortunate enough that my attorney's office retained him to come see me in August of 2019, and he did diagnose me with that. Unfortunately, these people here in this prison system's mental health department are unprofessional and just disrespectful and think that there's no possible way that an inmate can know more about a subject than they can, and that's not true. There's a couple of things that I know a lot about, and I'm fairly educated about the subject of gender dysphoria and other LGBT-related issues, but it's just it's unfortunate that inmates have to deal with that type of bullshit. And it's not just in Ohio; it's other places. I mean, and also, for example, you've got people who just don't understand, certain policies or rules or laws about a variety of things that work in the prison system, and they're just, they're incompetent. They shouldn't. How they got those jobs is beyond me. I mean, honestly, for some of the people, either they paid somebody off and bribed them, or they were sucking somebody's dick. I mean, that's the common reference and comments that are made by many people that work in the prison system about administrative people in prison administrations or at central office. And there's a reason they're saying those things. It's because of things that they've seen that I'm not even privy to. But that's just how things are. Generally, people who work with other people don't make comments like that unless there's a reason for it. And, if you've got a small handful, maybe it's just spiteful because that person did something to them and they just don't like each other. But when you've got people at multiple prisons, across the board, and not just guards, but other people in other departments that are not security, there's a reason they're saying it. It's not just for the sake of them saying it.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disservice to inmates in general, and it's not helping their mental health. For example, and I think you probably still got those, Bruce, those criminal complaints I wrote against the mental health people.
Mm-hmm.
You could post those online or send them. I'm going to have my one attorney, Luke, post them on my Facebook page too, but people could read those because the mental health supervisor here, she has concealed 2 medical documents from being placed in my mental health file, which is a felony under Ohio law if you work for a local, state, or federal governmental entity. Otherwise, it would just be a misdemeanor. But because they're a state employee, it's a felony. Another complaint that I wrote was against one of the psychologists. And she wrote false information in my file, in another inmate's file, lied in a conduct report she wrote against another inmate, lied at the Rules and Fraction Board hearing, and those were all felonies. The unfortunate thing is they cover for them. I'm in a very fortunate situation right now, and I'm waiting to hear from them again. But the organization called Equality Ohio has agreed to come on and represent me in a suit that I want to file against the prison system for the treatment and them refusing to give me hormone treatment. It's just wrong. But that's going to help me expose these people for the crimes they've done. I mean, it's extremely frustrating, and words can't properly express it. I mean, maybe they think it's a joke, or I'm not serious, or whatever. One of the psychologists I wrote a criminal complaint about, she said that in a progress note on my file, she said, well, I was only on the diagnosis because it would help me get off of death row. Well, no, that's not true. Actually, a law was signed in, a bill was signed into law by Mike DeWine, and there are 4 different mental health diagnoses that if somebody has one of them and they file a petition with the court in their county where they were sentenced, they can be taken off of death row and be given a life sentence. Those 4 diagnoses are if someone is schizophrenic, if they have schizoaffective disorder, if they are bipolar, or if they have delusional disorder. Delusional disorder is another term for multiple personality disorder. Gender dysphoria, if you notice, is not one of those 4 diagnoses. But also, the former chief psychiatrist, Kathy Burns, who is a lying bitch and unethical as hell, told mental health staff in 2014 to not talk to me about that subject at all. I mean, she told them not to do their jobs and to talk to someone about a legitimate diagnosis they may have. Unfortunately, a psychologist I had been talking to here after I got here in 2011 and then prior to them leaving in 2013, he actually diagnosed me with gender dysphoria. He never put that diagnosis in my file. He also gave me an IQ test. Never put that in my file. And if anyone's curious, I tested between 125 and 130. So I'm not an unintelligent person. I'm not uneducated. Even though I never graduated high school, I'm like self-educated. And I just turned 50, but, just because someone doesn't have a diploma or a GED, those of you listening to this, it doesn't mean you're not smart. It ain't hard to pick up a book and just read and learn about a subject matter. A diploma or degree is not indicative of someone's level of comprehension or intelligence.
Yeah, I agree. Olivia has a question for you.
All right, go ahead.
Do you ever have any trouble, even though your name is legally changed, do they, dead name and just don't pay attention to that, or do they have to say your transition?
Hang on. I'm having problems hearing you. Speak up just a little bit louder.
Do you ever have trouble with them trying to dead name you, or where you have it legally changed? Do they respect that?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. Here's the thing. In the Ohio prison system, if you get your name changed, you can request the court to do 2 things. One, you can ask the court to not, once your name is changed, then you can just get a new birth certificate or whatever. But legally, though, for inmates, we could request a court issue an order where we can change our old name and put our new name on all court records and decisions. I did not do that. I didn't want to have that done because, my previous name, Tim Hoffner, is related to a crime that I terribly regret happened and never should have happened. Now, the other thing that is done is the new name, if I want it done, can be added to their database in conjunction with my old name, and then I'll be able to get mail under both names, and then I get a new ID issued. Right now, my one attorney, Luke, has been trying to get in touch with somebody at central office regarding that, because the Bureau of Sentencing Computation is the department that handles that. He's left like 3 or 4 messages for that person there, and they have not returned any of his calls, which is bullshit. That's their job. But once again, everybody who is works for the prison system does not have the highest level of intelligence. But to answer specifically something you asked is this: once a person's name has been changed and they have that name added to the system in conjunction with their old name, staff can call them either name, though they are encouraged to be culturally sensitive and address them by the new name, which is fine. But, if they give an inmate an order using either name, they have to do that. I think probably part of that would have to be the level of respect and rapport that you have with those individuals. I have a really good rapport with the overwhelming majority of people who work here, especially guards, because I get along with them and I'm respectful to them, and they treat me with respect and don't harass me or anything. So that's cool. But as soon as we're able to get that taken care of, I'm going to let people know, and then they can send me letters under either name. But the cool thing is, I posted the name change documents on my Facebook page. Well, my attorney Luke did, so people can see them.
How do you think, if you get the hormones and all that, how do you think you'll be respected in the prison with the guards and the other inmates and stuff? Do you think the guards will still respect you and stuff? I'm sure a lot of the guards probably understand more, because I'm sure you got a lot of younger ones that seem to understand what's going on and stuff out in the world.
Well, I'm very open and transparent about who I am and what I'm doing. I've made it no secret that I have every intention of suing the prison system, and I'm going to expose the mental health department and some of the people who work here. And I'm not going to say who, but there's different people who work here who said, "Man, go at those mental health bitches because they are just lying pieces of garbage. If you can get them fired, because they cause more problems for us than we can even begin to comment on." So, but no, I mean, there's, being on death row is different. It's an isolation unit. So this is the only place I've ever been. I've never been in general population, but I'm the same way no matter what. And if, people, get on with me, fine. If they want to talk to me, that's fine. I don't fuck around with anybody here. I have zero interest in having any type of interaction with someone like that. It is what it is. My focus is on doing what I can to get off of death row and to hopefully regain my freedom one day. And unfortunately, a lot of the inmates here, they just sit around and waste time all day and don't do shit. And that's reflective of a lot of inmates who are in general population that aren't on death row too. They just waste time. They don't do anything constructive. Which I think is pretty sad. But no, it's I don't hide what I'm doing or what I'm about. So yeah, it is what it is. They like me, they do. If they don't, I don't care.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, honestly. When it comes to the mental health and stuff there, do you think if new people came in, do you think they would, I guess in a way, be better at it, or do you think they could follow in the same guidelines of what the older ones do now?
Oh, if they were different mental health staff?
Yeah, say they did get rid of them and they brought in new ones. Do you think it might follow the same protocol, or do you think they would actually bring new ideals and actually understand more what's going on? Because like you said earlier, a lot of prisons have this issue.
I don't know all of the people that work in this mental health department.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably around 20 or so. I've only encountered a few. And the ones that I've encountered, for the most part, are liars. What's interesting is there was an Ohio prison system psychologist from central office who interviewed me for like through a video telemed conference call. And she did. She saw me twice, and it was for probably around a total of almost 7.5 hours. And she did not work here, so she was not like inclined to do the same bullshit as the people in this department. And she absolutely agreed with Dr. Brown's diagnosis and also diagnosed me with having gender dysphoria. Unfortunately, the social worker that I'm seeing right now for counseling said, well, I disagree with that diagnosis, and I don't think you have that, and I don't think you should get the treatment. And she also committed a felony because she wrote false information in my file, even though it's not, probably very serious or relevant what the false information was.
Mm-hmm.
Understand that under Ohio law, if you write false information in a document that is a record that is kept or maintained by...
You have 1 minute remaining.
...by the prison system or another state agency, it doesn't matter what the falsification is. It's still a felony.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her that, I know she did that. It's just fucked up having to deal with this type of shit. And people outside of the prison system here, outside of this prison, they're more inclined to do their jobs. We're back. So, I think people just need to be, really be aware of, their rights and stuff and things like that, because, a lot of people, I've heard people refer to different laws over the years, and they're wrong about different things. I mean, even guys here, I had a phone conversation with, my mom. I'm adopted, so my adopted mom. And we were talking about voting. And I had asked her if my brother, who is also a convicted felon, voted. And she was like, well, I don't know. That's his business. And I said, he can vote, right? I said, even though he's a convicted felon. She was like, well, no, felons can't vote. And I said, whoever told you that is wrong. So, but each state's different. The overwhelming majority of states, felons can vote. Ohio, for example, as soon as someone is out of prison, even if they're on parole, they can vote. So, a lot of people who have criminal records need to be aware of that, because their voice matters. Unfortunately, there's some states who are just have asshole legislators who don't want them to have any rights and stuff like that, which in my opinion is akin to extortion, because if you're subjecting me to your laws and I have to pay money and taxes and stuff like that, I should be able to have a say in something. But voting is a wonderful honor to be able to do, and people really need to understand that, especially in the upcoming elections.
What do you think about the whole? I know around here, like where we're from, going back to like the presidential election, like where everybody's saying that that Biden got a lot of fake votes and everything, and that he shouldn't be president. Like, what is your thoughts on that?
All right, you talk about Trump's bullshit, the big. That the election was stolen stuff?
Yeah, where they said that it was like a lot of votes that shouldn't have counted and that they weren't real and everything.
Right. Well, here's the thing. In 60, I believe it was 61, actions that were filed in court by Trump's legal teams, such as Rudy Giuliani and the other people in whatever circus they got, who none of them, and bear in mind this, at a press conference, they can say whatever they want. They can say, we have information, we've got affidavits, we've got video and everything like that. That's one thing. People need to learn how to separate what is being said at a press conference by someone or on camera, like, when Trump would talk, versus reality. They can say all that shit. However, not one time in any court did they introduce any affidavit or any information like that, because they know if they would have, it would have been fraudulent and it would have been a felony and they could have been charged because they didn't have any evidence. I've been watching the January 6th hearings, and I have a different perspective. One, I've been locked up for, hang on, I'm going to do the math real quick. So, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July. In 5 days, I would have been locked up for 28 years and 8 months. I've been around different personalities. I have a unique perspective on dealing with people who lie, not just other inmates, but employees. But I've read books about doing interrogations and different shit like that. So when I see people talking, and I'm no expert, but some of the stuff I've read is really helpful. And one of the books was I can't think of the title right now, but it was by a former ATF agent named Janine Driver, and she's like an expert at reading body language and stuff like that. Oh yeah, it was called "You Say More Than You Think," so it's a good book. But it's insightful, and there's different things that people like Trump do is they want to project that they are winners and then deflect and push shit off to distract people from them being the focus of any negative attention or for having something that they did come out, which is what he does, but I mean, there were so many investigations into what was going on, even investigations into shit that was going on in Italy and all kinds of weird shit, and I mean, he just didn't want to admit that he lost. And unfortunately, it has caused such a divisiveness in this country, and I mean, in a way that it is going to be extremely harmful in the future. Things aren't over yet. I mean, you've got people that are threatening to kill current, elected officials. I mean, both of the Republicans on the January 6th committee and stuff like that. I may not agree with their views of the Constitution and what they think is a right that someone should have. I strongly disagree with the Republican agenda. However, I absolutely applaud them for doing what they are doing because they're not falling in line with Trump's bullshit and they're calling him on it, which is what needs to happen. If people are not held accountable for the crimes that they do, even Trump, just because he was a former president or he's wealthy doesn't mean he's above the law. No one is. If there's no accountability for those individuals, that sends a horrifying message to society. And that's it's not right. I see that shit here. I'm dealing with it right now, where people here have committed crimes and I was the victim of those crimes and nothing's being done about it. It's being, ignored or pushed under the rug by other prison officials. The state highway patrol is ignoring the shit. I can't say anything negative about the prosecutor because, he forwarded that information to be investigated by the highway patrol, but the state highway patrol is not doing a fucking job. But fortunately, everyone in law enforcement isn't like that, and some do their jobs. And that's what needs to be done here. I think people are so enamored with him for God knows why. It's appalling. My adopted mom is one. She believes that every single thing he says is true, and that all the Republicans who have testified at the hearings are lying about him and stuff like that. But I mean, the conversation was recorded when he called the secretary of a state in Georgia, Raffensperger. They recorded it. It's his own mouth, So, I'm not a political poli-sci major, and I don't know a lot about it. When I was here years ago, I never even paid attention to politics, really. But when things affect someone, you'll pay a little bit more attention to different things and understand your rights and stuff like that, and learn laws. I've learned a lot about criminal law over the years. That's my main focus. And if it wasn't for that knowledge that I've learned, I never would have realized these people actually committed felonies against, by what they did. And having said that, as Bruce knows, because he's seen stuff that I have, if you're going to report, one person for doing a crime, you can't be selective. And what I mean by that is this. For example, under Ohio law, you are not required by law. You do not have to report a family member who has committed a crime. Doesn't matter which crime is. You're not required to. Okay? Just like you don't have to tell on yourself. Or if you're married, you're not required to do that against your spouse. It's optional for those individuals if they choose to tell on their relative or something, along that line. Having said that, my reason for saying that was because, okay, I know that these prison employees committed crimes, and I wrote a criminal complaint, and we submitted it to the prosecutor's office. But also, if an inmate's doing something illegal that's a crime too, people need to say something about that, because inmates, and I can say this with certainty, people in jails and prisons who are inmates are on the end of having the most crimes committed against them by employees or people in positions of power who are have custody over them, and those individuals are never, for the overwhelming majority, never brought to justice or held accountable for their actions. Also, inmates commit so many crimes that go unpunished. I'm not specifically talking about where I'm at. I'm just saying in general, because there are so many assaults, so much drug trafficking in prisons across the country, assaults and all kinds of stuff. And the majority of them are never charged. So, I mean, my perspective is different, but I tell people this. There's a lot of crazy shit that happens in the world today, but if people don't have the courage to step up and say something when they see something wrong, it will continue to get worse. It's not going to get better if people don't say anything, and I know some might say, well, that's easy for me to say because I'm in here. Well, I still see it. I watch TV, I see all this shit happening in the world, and it's disappointing and makes me sad because I know what freedoms I've lost. And when I see so many people killing people every day, and you've got a lot of Republicans mainly who sit back and say that, the death penalty is right and stuff like that, and it's a deterrent to crime. Bullshit. It is not a deterrent to crime. If it was, there wouldn't be over 315 mass shootings so far this year alone. Yeah, definitely not a deterrent. Anybody who says that is full of shit.
Yeah, we just had the one in Illinois with Highland Park yesterday at the parade.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, and he'd been planning that for weeks. And that's a really interesting thing, too, is, I see so many people on TV after mass shootings saying, oh, well, we have to do our job and keep the guns out of, people who are felons and stuff like that. Yeah, interesting note. The overwhelming majority of shootings that take place like that are committed by people just like this punk in Illinois who did not have a criminal record and legally purchased every single firearm he had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a problem.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
it's amazing though how like a lot of like politicians. There's one, I can't remember his name, but the last shooting we had in Texas, he had said, what are we doing, and like went on this big speech, and I agreed with what he said.
in Uvalde.
Yeah, like he's like, what are we doing? But like a lot of them will just say, thoughts and prayers, and that's it. They don't do nothing else. It's just thoughts and prayers where, with whatever community it is, and then they don't do nothing.
And here's an interesting note about Texas, too, is, one, that kid right there, same thing, his punk ass legally bought a gun. Or he could legally own one. It doesn't matter. But what's interesting is, what I find very interesting about Texas is that a lot of people don't know this. Texas, it may be the only state in the country where felons can legally own guns in their homes. That's Texas law. You can legally own a firearm in your home if you are a convicted felon. That is Texas state law. But the overwhelming majority of shit that happens, it's done by people, I'm talking about mass shootings, who have never been in trouble. I don't know why they're doing that stuff. I mean, it's just unfortunate. And like what happened in Illinois, at Highland Park. They don't know what the motive was, or they didn't initially. Maybe they found out more information right now. But it's sad, I see stuff like that happen, and it makes my heart sad because I remember being free and not having the freedoms that people take for granted, but that the world was such a different place. I mean, I just turned 50, but when I went to school, man, we never heard about school shootings or anything like that, and it's sad that when little kids nowadays go to school, they have to worry about, wow, is there going to be a shooting today at my school? That's fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for any citizen to need an AR-15. Whether, it's fully automatic or not, it's a fucking assault rifle, man. There's reasons they make those. For the military and for citizens. For the military and police departments, or law enforcement. If you want to go hunting, you can buy. There is such a wide variety of guns that people can buy to use to go hunting. And what's interesting is, and felons can still go hunting too, because, a convicted felon, though you can't legally own a firearm, you can still buy an air rifle because it's not a firearm. It's a pellet gun.
Mm-hmm.
So people can use those. It's the same as a BB gun. But there's some that they'll shoot a 22 pellet. But it's not a firearm because a firearm is uses ammunition that is combustible. It's launched like that. Air rifles use CO2 or whatever. It's just the U.S. is the only country in the world that has mass shooting problems. No other country in the world has those types of problems.
I know a lot of people say, like, if you outlaw guns, that, criminals will still find a way. I just had a gentleman that I knew him, like, when I was growing up, like, he was on the same bus as I was. He's a couple years older. Like, he literally just got stabbed in the back the other day at a gas station. But it's like, like, people, like, I don't think people should have their gun rights taken away. Like you said, there should be something, a limitation on people that can get them, or something. Like you said, they have they have no criminal record, so they're just going in and buying whatever they want. But you kind of like I know a lot of people say with like the mental health. Do you think a lot of these, where it's a lot of younger generation, it's the like mental health, and they're kind of like crying out for help, for attention, and this is their way of doing it because nobody's listening, nobody's helping them. Because like with you, deal with the mental health issues in prison. A lot of places now where a lot of the expenses, people can't afford proper health, and as kids are being basically abandoned when they're literally struggling on the streets. Do you think that plays a part in what's going on?
There's a problem in not just one area, but multiple areas because, mental health, if people can't afford to see it, that's like you just said, and that's not on the kids because that's also on the school and stuff like that. I mean, if people would have been really willing to help, and if I could have found somebody that I would have trusted when I was in school, things would have been better for me. But I didn't trust the people in mental health that I was talking to, that my mom was taking me to, because I figured every single thing that I told them, they were going to tell her. And, if you can't have an honest conversation with somebody who is a mental health professional, they're not going to open up. They're not going to talk to you about shit that is affecting them personally. And therefore, it's not addressing whatever mental health issue it is that they are dealing with. That's part of the problem. There needs to be a safe space for them where no matter what they're talking about, they're not going to feel like they're going to be retaliated against in some way by their own parents or whatever. I mean, because, for example, say a kid was gay, but if he opened up to his parents, they might, chastise them or try to send him to some fucked up conversion therapy place or some bullshit, or want to take him to church. And that's not addressing the issue. That's only going to make it worse. I mean, so it might be other issues too. They could be getting bullied, but, there's people, there are signs out there, but, I think the most important thing is if you see somebody who's dealing with something, or a kid, but especially for kids, there needs to be a safe space where whatever they say, they need to know that they're in a safe space, that they can talk about anything without fear of, being judged or criticized or whatever. That is so, so important because that shit will carry with the person for decades, not just a short amount of time. It stays with you.
Yeah, I agree with Olivia's, like, where she has, going through therapy and stuff. Like, it took her, might as well say, until roughly, a year to find actually a therapist that actually listens to her, because most of them that she dealt with, they're like, here, we'll just put you on medication, like strong medication, and hopefully your problems will go away. Like, this therapist she has now really listens to her, lets her talk, and like I said, he's a safe spot for her because he don't talk about her. Like, he does it the way it should be done.
Yeah, but one other thing that you said real quick, though, about not restricting guns, I don't think guns should be, the way that the world is right now, I don't think taking away guns would be the right thing, but they absolutely need to be regulated. There need to be certain guns that should not be in the hands and be made available to anybody. Unfortunately, a big problem now is with 3D printers, how people can make those guns. That's a serious problem. And not just for people on the street, but I mean that's a serious security threat for prisons and jails and really for law enforcement. I mean, I'm an inmate, but I don't dislike police officers. They didn't put me here. I made a bad choice with someone, else, but I'm not the only person here on my case. But and ironically, I was talking to a guard recently who had worked in the cell block where my codependent is, and he said my codependent actually told him why I did it, which surprised me because to this day, until he told me that, I did not know the reason why my codependent wanted to kill that person. I did not. I speculated, what the reason might be, and I wasn't too far off, but I didn't know, But yeah, I mean, there's a problem with guns. I mean, it's obvious, I think, sadly, there's a lot of crimes that are committed, and they go ignored, and people don't say anything, and for that reason, people are left out there to do shit that shouldn't be doing it. If they were locked up, for other crimes they committed, it would be saving lives. But, and this from stuff I've showed you, where I had information, I saw something, and then, about something that somebody did in prison, and they were never charged for those serious felonies, and then they got out and shot somebody and almost killed them, and then he ended up back in prison, where, when you've got prison officials and, state highway patrol in whatever state, if they're not properly investigating shit by inmates that are, misconduct in prisons for crimes they've done and referring to them so they can get more time and answer for their conduct, it's the same for shit out there on the street, I mean, I've had information over the years about people that wanted to, sell kilos of cocaine. And I contacted multiple agencies. Not a single person would listen. Nothing was done about drug trafficking at all. You've got people that are selling kilos of cocaine. That's a serious problem. That's a threat to any community. And it just brings more problems. Because anywhere where there's drug trafficking, there's going to be some level of, violence, because you're going to have people who are addicts. Well, if they don't have a job or they want to get a fix, what are they going to do? Oh, they're going to go rob somebody. Sometimes, unfortunately, somebody's going to get shot and die, So, I mean, it's just a problem. I see it. I know this. I've been ignored about stuff. And it's a perpetual problem. And that's why I tell people, and this is unique because I'm an inmate, you don't hear a lot of people saying this. If you know about something, say something. But also, if you are serious about it, you need more than just your word. So with technology the way it is right now, with cell phones, man, you can record stuff. You can videotape anything. Depending on the state where you live at, Ohio, for example, if you want to record a conversation or video and not tell the other person, you don't have to because Ohio is a one-party consent state. One-party consent state means if you're part of the conversation, you give yourself consent to record it. Your consent is the only consent you need to record any kind of conversation covertly and not tell the other person. Also, under federal law, it's the same way. So I mean, use what tools that you have. Learn a little bit about the law. And believe me, if anybody out there has a question about something, and you want to ask me, shoot a message through Bruce's podcast or contact him or whatever, and I'll do what I can to, give you an answer and help. So my perspective is unique, but I do know quite a bit about criminal law.
Do you think
as far as what people can be charged with, not appeals?
Yeah, do you think that, because I know we've talked about a little bit about this before, do you think where you're on death row is why some of the, departments don't listen to you because they're like, oh, it's just an inmate trying to, save himself type thing?
You're fading it out, in and out on me, so repeat that really quick and I'll try to answer it.
Oh, sorry. But where we've talked about, like where you're on death row and, do you think that that's why, like, some of the departments don't listen to you? They're just thinking you're trying to save yourself type thing and trying to,
Possibly. It could be part of the problem. Fortunately, some people in law enforcement don't have that attitude, but I know that many other crimes are ignored by other inmates just because they're in prison. Being on death row might contribute to part of it for me, but I know that other inmates who are not on death row have been ignored, who have had information about crimes. What it comes down to, it's almost like it's a political thing where, look, if they take an interest and they have a hard-on for someone or they want to go after something, then they will. But if they don't, or you're trying to force them to do their job, or they don't want to do something and prosecute someone or charge them or whatever, they don't have to. They're going to fucking ignore it. And that's just, that's part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. They are part of the problem because they're not doing it.
You have 1 minute remaining.
And that's what they're paid to do, but they're not doing them. And most people in law enforcement, I would like to believe, are decent people who do their jobs. Many are pressured by others to not say anything when they see other people, in their departments doing misconduct. But some, they will do their jobs and pursue something if they know about it. But also, keep this in mind too. Every person in law enforcement, they have a supervisor to answer to. And if their supervisors tell them not to follow, work on a certain case or whatever, and they do, they can get in trouble. They can do their job. They could be fired. So it's you gotta, about a crime, go to a police department, record everything, have them on video saying, look, you people gonna do your job or not? But that's my tidbit. But hey, buddy, that's it.
Okay.
I'm glad we got to talk, man, and talk about these things, and we'll talk again soon, man.
All right.
And it was nice to meet you, Olivia.
Nice to meet you.
All right, have a good night.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for using GTS.
Okay, that was our interview with Taci Vixen, formerly known as Tim Hoffner. I know we touched base on quite a bit of stuff. Like, quite a bit, didn't we?
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, because she's very intelligent with everything.
I agree. I think it is.
Especially with law, and has, said, well, you were in there, I think. When she
woke up.
When she had mentioned that she'd been locked up for over 28 years, and what was it, 8 months? So, yeah. But one thing that she didn't touch base, she actually did serve in the Navy as well for a little bit, or maybe the full. I'd have to double check. At least, if not, at least 2-4 years, somewhere through there. I have photos and stuff of her in the Navy. But do you have anything to add to?
I don't know. I just want to say, I think that just goes to show that you can unlearn behavior and learn stuff even being in prison. A lot of people are just like, oh, that's just the way they were raised if they're being homophobic or something. But she's literally in prison and learning about the laws and what's going on, what's for real and what's not.
Yeah, which to touch base on at the end there, because we done 2 30-minute calls, which the first part was about, more of the being transgender and stuff in prison. But with the police department, not to with law enforcement, not to really throw them under the bus, but there's a case that another gentleman has talked to me about, and he's not from that state, and he's had the prison. I've reached out to him. They've not returned my calls. I've even reached out to the missing person place. They've never returned anything that I've sent them. And he has information on a crime, and the girl is still missing, but the guy that he talked to said, he killed her. And I kind of just wonder more, which you'll see that with a lot. It's kind of like an ego thing, oh, we've already, assumed this, so we're not going to touch it because, that's not what we thought it was or something you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But going back on the transgender thing too in prison, it's sad, which at least, she seems to have support with, other inmates, and, she's not trying to hide herself from anybody and having, the guards and everything. But it's crazy how a lot of mental health people they're just kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's are they not throwing, I'm not religious, well, I'm spiritual in a sense, but not, we've talked about this with the Christian belief and all that, but do you kind of feel that some of them might be putting their religion in front of it?
Oh, absolutely.
On their thought, instead of actually going by the book with the law and how it's supposed to be, they're actually putting their opinion with religion and all that into the perspective of it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I kind of see that too. Not saying that they're an older generation, because a lot of older generation do follow that, strictly. But that's one thing with like the Roe versus Wade. Like it's, if you're pro-life, that's fine, but you shouldn't. It's still an every individual. Not like if you want to be pro-life, it shouldn't. Your opinion shouldn't affect other people, and that's the way it should be. Like even people's like, oh, the states, control it, not the government. The state shouldn't control anybody's body. Like, I'm a white straight man, so nothing, not to throw straight white men under the bus, but the sad thing is, like, besides like a mass shooting, something like that, I don't have to worry about nothing because
Oh my
like, I'm
God.
not trying to be, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to be mean, but like,
What the fuck?
we had like for a straight white male, it's like none of our rights are going to be taken away. The only thing it might, if they do anything like we were discussed about with guns, which I'm not a gun owner, in a sense, but I have ways to protect myself. And like I said, I'm not against guns or anything like that. If you have guns, they should be, in a safe area. But I remember reading a gentleman that had, can't remember if he was a school shooter or just a mass shooter, but he's like, I had access to guns. I knew where my grandfather kept them, so I got them and went and shot people. But like I said, like we live in an area. It's like people don't care unless it affects them. And like with the women's, if you be pro-life, like I said. But it's still pro-choice individually for every woman. And a lot of people, they're pro-life, but they're not. They're just pro-birth because they don't care about the kid once it's here.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part because you got so many kids that go through the system with trying to be adopted and everything. It's heartbreaking. It really is. And a lot of situations, if a parent didn't want a kid and now they're going to have it to a sense, then the kid, like, you know what I mean? Like a lot of the feelings and stuff of that, of not wanting the child is going to, you know what I mean? Going to go to that child if the parent's like, oh, I really didn't want you. And that causes a whole lot of other stuff down the road. But it's just sad. I kind of went off on a little rant there. But
Yeah.
it's just sad how, like I said, it's just crazy that white straight men are not getting targeted for anything. But if we got targeted for something, I'm sure there'd be a big uproar. You know what I mean? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're tripping me out with that.
Well, you know what I mean, though. Because that's what it is. Everybody that's mostly in politics, they're older gentlemen that see it their way or the highway, and it's always been like that. This country, like what Lavio said, has been built on blood and violence and everything. With when they came to the land, they killed the Native Americans and all that, and they took over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sad. Sorry, it's just sad. But we'll wrap this up. Sorry for that little rant there at the end, but it's just a crazy world we live in. It honestly is, and I think she shared quite a bit, and from a different perspective as well. And to be, like I said, locked up for almost 30 years, she's very knowledgeable about a lot of the stuff now.
Very progressive.
Yeah, kind of like the same thing with some of the other individuals we have spoken with. They, like what she said, you got your ones, a lot of them that just sit around, like they just kind of like, well, I'm just here, so I'm just going to be here. And you got, a lot of them that's, taking college courses, studying, trying to be productive, and trying to make a positive impact on society in a way. But we thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.